Most of the advice you hear about productivity and time management isn't relevant for students. In fact, most of it focuses on time blocking and writing better to-do lists, which can actually make doing your assignments harder. Research on attention residue shows us that when we switch away from an unfinished task, that parts of our attention stay focused on it, which makes it harder to perform on the next one. But there are 3 techniques that can actually help you get your assignments done in less time and on time. Today I'm going to show you what those techniques are and how to apply them. Which brings us to our first technique, immersion. Immersion works because it allows you to deeply focus on one task without distractions. In the context of assignments, that means that you focus on one assignment at a time without jumping in between them. This is important because assignments are built up of smaller tasks. So every time you stop or switch, you break your momentum. For smaller assignments like practicals or tutorials, that can look like sitting down and working on that entire assignment until it is complete. To help you do that, I've created an assignment decoder guide. You're welcome to download that. The link's in the description below. By working on one assignment until completion, it means you'll finish that assignment faster. That's because every time you jump between assignments, you're making each task last longer. You're more likely to waste time rereading your notes or figuring out where you're up to or what you needed to do for it. So not only does it cost you time, but it can even cost you marks if you miss something in that switching process. This is especially true in larger assignments where we're researching and looking at a lot of journal articles. Sometimes when we read a journal article, we can have a sudden thought and that leads to another article and then another and another. The last thing you want to be doing is stopping that thought process and jumping across to a different assignment. That's why immersion works better. It gives you enough time to think properly. And that usually means that you get more done in one setting with less stress and less total time. Now, the second problem with most productivity advice is to-do lists. Lists have been around for thousands of years, so the concept of writing things down to stay organized isn't exactly new. But a little over 100 years ago, a specific kind of list became part of modern productivity advice, the to-do list. Back in 1918, Ivy Lee was hired as a consultant for Bethlehem Steel. His productivity advice revolutionized how they worked. His method was simple. Write down the most important tasks for tomorrow, put them in order, and work through them one by one. Now, while this sounds sensible and productive, for students it has a major weakness. A to-do list is not the same thing as a plan. The problem is that to-do lists are flat. They're two-dimensional. It tells you what exists, but it doesn't immediately tell you what's most urgent and most important. And it doesn't tell you which one you should do, or when it needs to be done by, or what you need to do for it. And in fact, it's often the reason why larger assignments get left behind. That's why the second technique is prioritization. A simple prioritization technique will tell you immediately which assignment you should be working on. When you look at your assignments, you want to ask yourself 2 questions. Which one is due next and which one is worth the most? What's due next tells you which is the most urgent, and what's worth the most tells you which one is most important. Now, unfortunately, most of the time, those 2 assignments won't be the same thing. Your most urgent and most important will often be different ones. That's okay. There's a way to know which one you should be working on and how much time you should spend on it. Now, at the outset, if you have a small assignment due tomorrow, then obviously that needs your immediate attention. But if it's only a small assignment, not worth a huge percentage, say less than 10%, then you don't want to be spending a lot of time on it. You apply the immersion technique until it is done. Which brings us to the third technique, segmentation. Because even when you know what is important, the larger assignments are often left until the last minute. Not because you're lazy, but because it's harder to know when and how to work on those larger assignments when you've got all of those other smaller ones due at the same time. The fix is to not look at every assignment as one big task. In fact, every assignment can be broken down into 4 parts: planning, researching, writing, and editing. Once you break the larger assignments up into those 4 parts, it becomes easier and clearer to see what you should be working on. And that's what segmentation is. You segment the assignment into those 4 parts. And then you assign those parts to the weeks before the assignment is due. This is where we combine prioritization and segmentation together into that system and plan our whole semester. So instead of having write your essay on a traditional to-do list, you now have a planner or calendar where you mark on the day that it's due, submit essay. And then the week before that, you have a reminder that says edit that essay. The week before that, you have a reminder that says write that essay. The week before that, you have a reminder that says research that essay. And the week before that, you have a note that says plan that essay. You then fill in the gaps around that with the due dates of any of your smaller assessments that only require a couple of hours of your time. So each week at a glance, you can see what's most urgent and what's most important is there is a note telling you what you need to do and when. For example, this week, maybe your calendar says that you have a practical due on Tuesday. It's only worth 3%, so you know how much time you should be spending on it. But then on Thursday, you have a note there saying that you need to research your essay that's due in a few weeks' time, but is worth 20%, so you know what you have to do on that day. It takes the guesswork out for you. It makes your larger assignments easier and helps you complete the smaller ones faster.